Well, I love is technology. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
The great thing about radio is you don't have to worry about any of this stuff because it's radio. And when you talk about radio, you don't have to worry about this because no one can see it because radio, as you know, is a theater of the mind. So there's no pictures.
We've lost all our minds here.
There's pictures here, Dave.
Yeah.
You told me we're going to be talking about radio.
That's right.
Okay, but there's pictures, Dave. We're up here.
We're up there. Well, it's kind of, it's television radio.
Oh, I got you. Okay, I feel much better now.
And it's like radio, but radio with pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a fad. Remember when they said TV was going to be a fad?
Oh, yeah. No, that was
They even thought radio was going to be a fad.
Yep. In fact, a lot of people still do.
Yes.
When are we going to get through this fad?
And someday we're going to talk about where is radio going? What's it doing? And
there has been a lot of talk whether radio is here to stay. And if you go back into the old days of radio, we don't go back that far, but we know people that have gone back that far. It was a whole different thing. Before there was television, radio was, that was it. And everybody would sit around the radio, and that was the big thing. And they every syllable they heard out of there was like gospel. Whatever your radio told you.
Well, it was a different type of radio. It was, like you said, it's theater of the mind. Like the War of the Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's definitely theater of the mind. That throw everybody's mind crazy. But other shows, Lum and Abner, and then you got Abbott and Costello, and of course the famous Jack Benny show, and Fred Allen, and all those guys. It was theater of the mind. They would describe things, and like the Lone Ranger, they would tell you, well, the Lone Ranger's now getting on his horse, and he's going to be doing. Mm-hmm. So you're visualizing the Lone Ranger getting on his horse and sailing off into the sunset, as they say.
Well, one of the things that television offers now are for people that are visually impaired. There's what they call descriptive video services, and that runs on a separate channel because for people that are blind, I have a friend of mine who is blind. He had no way of ever knowing what channel to turn to, so the only way he knew what was actually going on was when he'd hear, if everybody said Norm, he knew Cheers was on. So his name's Tom Litkowski. We should probably have Tom on sometime. And what he developed was basically the talking remote. So you could actually find out when you went on your remote that this was ABC, this was that. And he designed descriptive video services. So
amazing.
Back in the day when you listened to radio, they would give you all the action.
You used to read for Chris.
Yeah, I still read to the blind. Still do that. Yeah. But with Tom, it was interesting because he you don't know if you think, oh yeah, well if you're blind you can still watch TV. You don't see the action. See, you'll hear what the actors are saying on TV, but you don't know that. He walked across the room. He picked up the gun. You don't see any of the action. No. So on a separate channel with descriptive video, they do that.
They do that. Oh,
yep.
So it's like radio back in the old days.
Yeah. In fact, he actually it was funny because Tom and I worked in radio at a place called the Connecticut Radio Information System, which is a radio station that is for blind or print handicapped. And you basically the news of the day or even local news, what's going on. I read People Magazine. Go in there and read that because they can't see that. But Tom wanted to get into commercial radio. He said, I did this, so I want to do commercial radio now. Okay. So WPOP, they gave him an opportunity. No problem. Tom goes in there, puts Braille on all the carts. He ran our news network. No problem. Then what does he say? I want to go into television. Tom's blind. What do you mean you want to go into television? Because I want to go into television. So one morning I'm watching the local network, and I'm watching the network news. I think it was maybe CBS or something, the big morning program. And they're talking about this new thing called descriptive video services. I said, oh. Then they go up to WGBH in Boston. I said, hey, gee, that's where Tom works. And all of a sudden I see Tom. I said, that's Tom. Blind, no glasses, looking directly at the camera. And Spielberg had given GBH $50,000 to do descriptive video service for Schindler's List. And that was how the whole thing got started. And now, all these years later, Tom Litkowski, who we knew all the way back to, reading to the blind and print handicapped, Vice President of Accessibility for Comcast.
Wow.
He's huge in the television world. You can't, but that's, the point of it is, that was when we take all this for granted. you know, and that was so important back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's changed a lot.
Now, Steve, how long have you been involved in the broadcast industry?
My entire life.
Your entire life.
I say that, and I really mean it, because my dad and mom met at WDRC back in the 1940s during World War II.
And your dad is?
Charlie Parker. Yep.
Who was?
My dad.
Vice President
you
of
want
Programming.
more than that? Oh.
Well, his title
Yep,
is
yep.
Vice President of Programming.
For WDRC.
DRC.
Yep.
That was what, 36 years in the rock and roll era, but he was there.
Oh my God. Well, he did, let's see, total of 38 years that he was there. Started there in 1946, and that's when he met my mom, and made it a rock and roll station on August 18th of 1960, and stayed there until 1982, and then because of his health, he wasn't there anymore after that. But yeah, you know, it was just, it's all changed so much. I got a note today about a major broadcast company fired all their voiceover people, a radio company, all the people that do like the IDs and on the the identifications and all that, fired them and replaced them with AI.
That's what I was afraid of. Yep.
All gone. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. It's all gone. And then you know what they said? They said, well, this is going to save a lot of jobs. Explain that to me again? Well, because they're saving all that money, now they don't have to let people go in other positions, because they can take that money that they don't have to spend on the announcers and use it in other parts of the business.
And the announcers will probably sound the same.
Well, that's what AI is.
Yeah. So the listener out there won't know the difference.
Yeah. But back when we were younger, I mean, that's when, we talked about the DJs and what they meant, and people enjoyed listening to that kind of stuff. But I think what's always I found interesting about you is I don't know too many people like Dave that, well,
It's a good thing.
But but that have actually, you go way back and actually were in the very beginning, worked in television, right? You did a lot in the very, very beginning.
Well, my first job in the business was television.
Yeah.
I worked at WNEW TV, Channel 5 in New York City. It was an independent station. And now it's called Fox 5 WNYW. And it was owned by Metro Media when I was there, great company. And I go to school in the morning, in the early afternoons, and then I would take a cab and go over to 205 East 67th Street.
But excuse me, how did that happen? How did you first get that opportunity to go into that TV station? What did you do? Who did you know?
Well, I didn't know any. The only one I knew was my roommate, Bruce Warner, wanted to. He needed a job, and he was trying to get a job. So one of my classmates worked at Channel 5. He was a page, an usher, what they call guest relations is the department he worked in. He says, I'm looking for another page. And I says, talk to Bruce. So Bruce says, yeah. He says, where's Channel 5? See, where he was from, upstate New York, they couldn't get Channel 5. I grew up watching 5. So I said, Bruce, I'll go with you. And so the day we had the classes and the day we left, what happened was there was a transit strike in New York. Everything's like the subways, the buses. The only ones running were the cabs.
Wow.
So the only way we could really get that, and you couldn't get a cab, forget it. So we were on 41st Street. We walked from 41st Street to 205 East 67th Street. Wow. In the pouring rain.
Oh.
It rained as if they had a fire hose on you all the way down to where we had to go. And so we got to the studio. We met up with our classmate. And we wound up both going to the program director's office. So we're both standing there like a bunch of a couple of drowned rats. And he's sitting there, and so he starts talking. I says, well, he's looking for a job. I'm not. He says, well, I can use 2 guys.
Oh, great.
I said, okay, sure. And he says, yeah, well, we were hired right on the spot. I says, when would you like us to start? And he goes, right now.
Wow.
I said,
we're drenched.
I said, we're drenched. We don't really. He says, it's okay. He says, I need 2 people. to be in the audience on the Skitch Henderson show, because they would broadcast Skitch Henderson live. And I went, huh? So we wound up going downstairs. We were in the studio. They had this guy. You probably have seen him before. He can memorize photographic mind.
Oh, okay.
He would go around before the show started and ask us what our names from and where we were from. So I told him, and so Bruce told him, and he went around the whole audience. We had a pretty packed audience. Then they bring this guy on. Now, Skitch's show was 90 minutes long. Probably an hour and 15 minutes into the show, they bring this guy out. And he's out there, and he starts talking and that. And then he goes, looks at us. We're all on camera. And he says, and you, Boone, he goes, and he looks at me, Dave Overson from East Haven, Connecticut. And blah, 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 blah. And, and I was impressed. I was impressed. And he got everybody right, So when I got home, or back to my apartment, I called my mother. I says, Ma, I got a job. She says, were you on television? I go, yeah. I said, that's where I'm working, at Channel 5 in New York. I says, wait a minute, how'd you? She says, I'm Sayers Nanny. She used to iron and watch the television set.
Oh, my God.
She's watching the iron, and she's looking at it, and he says, Dave Overson from East Haven, Connecticut. And she goes, and like
oh, my
this.
God. Oh, my God.
So I figured she'd be proud. You send your son to broadcast school. He's now on television. This is great. No, typical mother. Why weren't you in class? I said, Ma, classes were over. I said, only go from 9 to 1. Mm-hmm. And she says, that's all? I go, yeah. And says, so we went there, and we got the job, and then we started that next day. Don't let this job affect your classes and all that. And I'm saying to myself, classes.
Who wants to go to classes? You got the job.
Well, there's at the school, you ran the equipment and such. And in this job, it was just, you were mailing letters and dealing with people. And so I got the job, and the school I went to didn't teach us the stuff that we really needed in the broadcast business. We needed to learn how to run a tape machine, how to splice and edit with a razor blade, had to do all that. And I never did that. I learned the professional aspect of it on the job. And when I was a kid in high school, I would make my own production pieces. And the football game coming up, or there's school dance, and I would do a promo on it. It got to be pretty popular in the school, and I would cut the music and that. But I mean, it was bad. It wasn't, not when I started working with 2-track decks when I was at DRC. Mm-hmm. So from there, I graduated from the broadcast school. I left Channel 5. I was offered a job at Channel 5, which was great, but I was. I have to get my own apartment now, and the prices were outrageous. So I left. I came back to Connecticut. I was going to become a big-time disc jockey in Connecticut, and I tried other stations. And the first thing you do is you got to, try, call all these stations up.
Oh yeah.
And the one station I called up, I think it was like the third station I called, was WLAE in Meriden, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And I used to tell my students at CSB.
At Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
I wound up teaching at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, but I didn't go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I auditioned at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, but I decided I'm going to learn a lot more in New York than in Hartford, Connecticut, and bad move. Mm-hmm. But anyways, I always tell everybody that I started at the top. I was hired as operations manager. I was the first job in operations manager. I was also the news director. Fantastic. Yeah. And I was also the music assistant director. I was also the guy that swept the place. I was also the guy that cleaned the toilet, because I was the only person at the radio station. And I was running 2 radio stations. I was running WLAE, which was all tape, manually tape programming, and then WHCN, which was also all tape, but that was in an automated system. We used to run a carousel, and that thing would jam up all the time, and you walk in the studio and and you got to fix it, and so you became a jack of all trades, master of none. So I did that for I think about 9 months, and then I decided to go for my first class FCC license. So I went to school for that, got out of there, and while I was working on top of, I was on top of Meriden Mountain. That's why I say I made it to the top. I remember looking out over the edge of the cliff on Meriden Mountain, be looking there, and I say, someday I want to work in this valley. Someday, Lord, I want to work in this valley. And 10 years later, I wound up working in that valley. That valley was working at ESPN. And there was a small station in Southington they were building, and I thought, well, maybe I can get a job there, and because I knew the guy that built it. And that didn't happen. So I got to know the chief engineer at DRC because he would come up and do the weekly FM readings because he had a first-class license. I didn't have a first-class license. So then I went to school, and I had called the chief engineer at DRC, and he says, no, I don't have any openings. I'm sorry. I said, that's okay. That's all right. No problem. So I said I had to get to the license, and I already had this time the license. I'll tell you, if you ever had to get an FCC license, you had to get 3 licenses. Now, this is the way it was back in the day. You had to get a third-class license. That was for taking basic transmitter readings on a daytime station.
I have that.
Huh?
I have that.
You have that.
I had to get that.
Yeah, everybody that went to broadcast school had to get a third-class license. So I got that, and I thought that was a big deal. But then, you're talking to people who've got first-class licenses. It opened up more doors for me.
One more thing I want to add.
What's that?
A lot of people got the third-class license, but the thing that you really wanted with the third-class license was Element 9 is what they called it.
Yeah.
And Element 9 meant that you could go on the radio. You could be a broadcaster. You could be a DJ. Without Element 9, you couldn't go on the air.
Well, Element 9 allowed you to read the transmitter readings.
Yeah.
And,
and go on the air.
And go on the air.
Yeah.
So I had all that. Then I went to school for a month, 4 weeks, 8 hours a day. I traveled from East Haven to East Hartford every day for 8 hours.
What was the school?
It was Elkins Institute of Broadcasting. I don't know if they're still in business. But anyways, they taught you how to take the test for the FCC first-class license.
Oh.
So I did that, go home, and then study another 4 more hours. So I was starting, you're talking 12 hours a day.
Wow.
And then get up early in the morning and go. And I'll tell you a couple things. When I took my 3 tests, because you go for the third-class test, then you go for the second-class test, which is allow you to work on ham radios and somewhat commercial radios, but not, not the big radios, transmitters and such. So you had the second-class license. Second-class license was the toughest because you had to read schematics. You had to look at what this schematic was, tell whether a power supply to a converter and all that. So that was the tough test. So when I had my third-class test, I sat at the same desk in New York City at the Examiner. When I went up for my second class, I sat in the same desk. It was available. I sat right there. The examiner looks at my test, says, you passed. I says, I'll see you next week. So I went back, did more studying, came up for the last time, hopefully. And I walk in and he says, oh, you're back. You want the first class? I go, yes, sir. And he comes in, I look, and there's somebody sitting in my seat. And I looked, I had that dejected look. And he goes, is there a problem? I said, just someone sitting in the seat that I took my other 2 licenses. That's all. No big deal. I'll go wherever you want me to go. I don't know. Comes up. Now, an examiner can move you wherever he wants. He come up, so before we all start the exam, he comes in and he goes, you move over there. You sit here.
Yep, got your lucky desk, yeah.
I got my lucky spot. I passed the test, and it was like a ton of bricks just lifted off your shoulder. Totally lifted off your shoulder. Because, this is it, my whole career. So I went out in the field and worked at WWCO. Played again, more tapes on the overnight, one night a week. And then the program director called me. He says, can you fill in for an FM guy on the FM, which was Radio 104. But they were doing country music back in the day.
Yep.
And so we were owned by Merv Griffin.
Yep.
It was a Merv Griffin
Yep.
station. So then I did a couple shots there, but nothing was happening. So I wound up getting a part-time job at a manufacturing company, which I hated. And so I had
Do something you love and you'll never work another day in your life.
and how, and so I wound up getting a job at WDRC. But how I got that was interesting. I signed up to go to electronics school. So I got the license. Now I'm going to learn the knowledge behind the license. So I went, so George Watson, the chief engineer at DRC, calls me and says, Dave, he says, I got an opening. You interested? I said, yeah, I just signed up to go to electronics school. He says, go to school. Just go to school. Don't worry about it, but go to school. And I said, yeah. And he says, the job is not worth a full-time job. Go to school, get the education. And he was right. So I said to him, anything part-time you have available? And he goes, well, yeah, I don't know if you would want it. It's 1 day a week, Sundays. What's the shift? 12 to 8. I says, 12 midnight to 8 in the morning? No, 12 in the afternoon to 8 at night. I says, I'll take it. I'll take it, yeah. So I went up to DRC. I observed the engineer. His name is Bo Raines. He was the engineer at the time. And the first guy I ever worked with was Bob Craig. WDRC did middays. And then the second guy I worked with was Dick McDonough. And I got to know Dick and Bob. And then at night, before we ran Casey Kasem, we started doing Casey Kasem, I worked with Terry Woods back then, now Chuck Morgan, Chuck Martin in L.A., and had a few other guys that worked well known, Joe Hager and Joe Sherwood and all these guys that worked the weekends. And then they replaced them with Casey Kasem. I ran the first Casey Kasem American Top 40 out of DRC. So I did that, and then I worked, while I was working there, I worked at WBMI in Meriden. I was a DJ there. And then that kind of fell through. And then I wound up working at WLIS in Old Saybrook.
Oh, yes. Yes, I know it well.
So I worked there on and off for a while. And the owner of the station liked me because he must have thought I knew something because I was working at WDRC. And all the guys there have been telling him, you need to get jingles. You need to run jingles because it was like an automated format live. You go, music you go, and the copy would be WLIS, pause, Old Saybrook, pause, Connecticut. And that's basically all you did. You didn't intro records, but you played the records. Had any, and in the format you had an instrumental, male vocal, male group, instrumental, female group, female vocal, and that was the format of the rotation. I remember coming out of Creedence Clearwater Revival to Jimmy Durante singing Inka Dinka Doo. It was crazy. So I did that. So one day I just started talking up some of the records. I got bored. And so following a week I went in and I had talked to the the owner of the station about getting jingles, because we would get sample jingle packages when I was at DRC, and of course, we weren't going to use them, so I took them and I gave them to him. I says, "Here, you should try the jingles." And so his wife came up to me. She says, "We don't announce the names of the songs on the radio." I said,
Oh, God forbid.
I says, "How are they going to know what songs they are?" "Well, they'll know." I says, "How?" She says, "Well, they have Cashbox and
Oh, my
broadcast
God. Oh, my
magazines."
God.
I said, "But they're for people in the trades. I mean, the John Q. citizen out there doesn't read these magazines." "Well, if not, they'll know them in New York City." "Well, if they know them in New York City, then they're not listening to WLIS in Connecticut." And and I heard this voice from the office going. He says, "He's right, Helen. Dave, come in here." So I walked in there, and he says, "You're right. You're 100% right. What can we do to get this station?" I said, "Well, you need the jingles. That gives the advertising. Talk the jingles up. Talk to people. Have the jocks." And I walked into the, he says, "I'm going to work on that. Can you?" I said, "You have a program director. This guy is very good." I says, "Let him, he knows what he's doing." And so, to make a long story short, they started putting personality on the station.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked into the studio, and the guys two of the guys were there, applauded me, and one of them was the PD, and he goes, "Thank you." He says, I said, "I don't know why he's listening to me." He says, "Because you work at DRC. You work at WDRC," and I said, "He must think I'm somebody." Little did he know I was just a part-timer then. So years go on. I'm get out of school, out of electronic school. I'm done. And so, and your father called me one night and wanted to know if I could come in and work the board for one of the jocks. And I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "Why didn't the chief engineer call me?" So I found out that the chief engineer was gone. And they hired this other guy named Wayne Mulligan. And I go, "Who's this Wayne?" And then he said, "Well, he came in from TIC. "Oh, and he's working here." Well, I didn't know the story. Wayne had worked at DRC years ago, worked with Ron Landry. He was his engineer there, and then went to TIC for numerous years. And then they called him back to DRC to be the chief engineer there. So I called Wayne up, and I said, "I'm Dave Overson," and I says, blah, blah, blah. "Yeah, come up and see me." I said, "Sure, glad to." I said, "How about Friday? I'll meet you 1 o'clock Friday." I says, "You're on." So before I go up on a Friday, I'm thinking, and I'm going, let's see. This guy Mulligan came from TIC. That means there's an opening at TIC. So before I went up and saw Wayne in the morning, I went to TIC.
Oh, nice
So,
guy.
Yeah, I talked to the guy there, and or I talked to the receptionist. She said, "We gotta have a first-class FCC license. We're gonna run over, and I have a FCC first-class license." And I says, "Yeah, I have that." "You do?" So she calls the supervisor. He comes down, and he looked at me and he smiled, and I smiled back at him, and. All I do is remember the receptionist when she called Sam up, the supervisor, and she says, "You need to come and talk to this man."
Got a live one.
Yep. Well, little did I realize, my hair is short. My hair was not as short, but definitely not as long, and I fit that mold because it's a very conservative mold and such. So I went there. I had an interview with Sam and filled out the application, and he says, "Can you come back later today?" I says, "Yeah, I can." He says, "Because the chief engineer, Steve Myers, is not here right now." Remember the name, Steve Myers. So, okay. So I go over to see Wayne Mulligan. Wayne wasn't there. So, well, he's running a little late. Half hour, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Wow.
At one point, I says, "I got to go." So, and I hung around the station because I knew everybody because I had, free reign around there. So, and so I I said, I got to go. And so I wound up going back to TIC. And Steve Myers is there now talking to me. Takes me around the entire plant, TV studio, radio master control, TV master control. And then we get back to his office, and he goes, well, he says, have you here, and your resume looks good. You know, what resume was whatever I had on the application. So he says, you're one of 42 applicants.
Oh,
Puts
boy.
me up on the top of the pile, just face down. And I says, well, thank you. I says, I hope to hear from you. And, you know, saying to myself, I says, I got to call this guy Mulligan, you know, and because I really wanted to work at DRC. So less than a week goes by, I get a call from Wayne, all apologetic. I didn't know you were here. One of the people said, hey, Overson was here. When? Friday. He says, you had a meeting with him? And he goes, oh, he says, I forgot, you know. So I figured, well, beholden to me at this point. So, and he offered me a job, you know, a weekend here, a week here, a week this summer relief. And I said, well, thank you very much, appreciate it. And I took the job. I called Steve Myers back, got him right away. And he says, we've been looking for you. We want you to start. He says, how's Monday? What time? 10 o'clock. Come in at 10 o'clock and we'll go through everything and you'll work Monday, and you'll work until probably September straight through. And so it was steady work. It wasn't.
Yep.
So then I had the tough job calling Wayne back. Wayne was a great guy. Called him back. I told him, I said, I have another offer. And he said, mind if I ask you where it is? I says, yeah, it's your old stomping grounds, TIC. He says, good place to work. He says, they're going to offer you a lot more, because he knew the whole story there. And he says, let me call you back. Calls me back. Spent an hour with me on his dime, telling me about who to watch out for, who to get in there, told me all the ins and outs of the place.
Of TIC.
Of TIC.
Yeah.
So I worked at TIC. In first part of September, my contract was about to run out. I called him up, Wayne Mulligan up, and I said, Wayne, can you get me out of here? I says, my contract's almost up. He says, I just hired this kid. And I says, okay. If something changes, I'll let you know. You'll be the first. I says, please do. 2 weeks later, I'm doing mic line, and I get
On WTIC.
on TIC. I'm engineering mic line, and somebody, one of the engineers came in. He says, hey, you got a phone call. Okay, so I'm going, and it's Mulligan. You still interested in coming here? I go, yeah. I said, when would you like me to start? 2 weeks ago. Apparently, this kid hired was messing around with the equipment and changing the sound of the station.
Oh, boy.
So he had to go. So I said, Wayne, I said, I got to talk to Steve. So I figured I'll go in and, do a little barter, not a barter, but, leverage here.
Yep.
So I go into Steve, and I said, Steve, I got another offer. He says, yeah, I know. I said, yeah. He says, take it. The DRC? Yep, take it. He says, great outfit. Wayne's a great guy. And he says, take it. And I says, was my work that bad? Oh, no, your work was fine. It was great. Take the job. I can't get into it right now, but take the job. So he calls Wayne up and says, Wayne, he says, you can have Overson, but I need him for the GHO and the flower show they're doing. Excuse me. So he tells Wayne, Steve asked me, he says, how much they giving you? I says, the same amount of money I'm making here. Oh. So calls Wayne up. Yeah, he says, you can have Dave Overson, he's a great guy, blah, 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 and he says, and by the way, I gave him a $10 a week raise. That's how good he is. And you're going, wow, wow, he's expecting that money. He's, because you said you were going to pay him the same amount of money he's making here. Well, he's making, I'm like this going, I'm fine, and all right, okay, good move. It's a wise move. Okay, hang up. Hangs the phone up and looks at me straight in the eye and says, never leave a job for the same amount of money or less. You always go for more. I says, I'll remember that. So I finished on a Saturday at TIC, and I started on a Sunday at DRC. They didn't need to train me because I knew all the board and that, and the rest was history. Spent actually 10 years in total at DRC, and then I left and went over to ESPN.
But that leaves radio. Means
That
you're
leaves-
back in the other world.
Yeah, it was-
And your heart is still in radio.
Heart was still in radio
Yep.
because I was the production guy at WDRC. I was the production manager, director, whatever you want to call it. And I ran all the production. I even got to do some creative stuff in there. And 1776, I did that piece, and then did the Elvis eulogy with your dad, and I even the 776 with your dad, and then we did 16 Years of Rock, and plus all the different contest promotions that we did, and commercials. I remember doing the Connecticut Dragway with McDonough and Lon Landis. Lon Landis was phenomenal on those. He was phenomenal. And so I had fun. It was fun. It was creative. We all had fun there. And I remember when you started at DRC.
Fun. We were having fun.
Fun. It was fun radio. So,
Yeah.
So I go over to ESPN, and I'm interviewing with Steve Myers. I had asked Steve if there were any part-time jobs at ESPN.
So he was over there then from TIC?
From TIC over
He went over to ESPN.
ESPN. And the reason he went over there was because TIC sold.
Oh.
I remember going into Wayne's office, and Steve was there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, "Hey, Steve," I said, "how are you?" He says, "Well," I said, "I can tell you now." He says, Travelers sold TIC. I said, "You're kidding me." Oh, and that really surprised a lot of people.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
it shocked people.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember we were all having lunch one day, and somebody were doing all these asset tags going around, and guys were joking about it. Saying, "Oh, I got all these asset tags." That's probably to give someone
What are they called?
asset tags, little barcoded asset tags on every piece of equipment, including the chairs.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and they're all laughing, and I said, "Gee," I said, "last time I saw that done was they were selling the radio station," and one of the higher ups, nice guy, said to me, he goes, "Oh no, TIC would never sell. The Travelers would never sell TIC. They're too big." I says, "Well, maybe you're right, you know." And then when I heard that they sold TIC, I went, whoa. And that's why Steve said, "Take the job at DRC." So years later, I go over to ESPN, sitting with Steve, and Steve says, I want to bring you on, bring you in. I was out of DRC at the time, and I had called Steve up. I had called Steve Myers up, and I said, "I'm out of out of DRC. Would you still interested?" Yeah. He says, "Can you hold on for a week or two?" And I said, "I can hold on for 12 weeks. They gave me 12 weeks severance. And so I said, "Okay." So I met him 2 weeks later, and Steve is sitting there, and I said, "Steve, what's my salary going to be?" And he says, "Well, I can pay you the same amount of money as you made at DRC.
No.
And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, a wise man once told me, don't leave for less money or always go for more." He says, "Who told you that?" I says, "You did. 8 years ago, if you remember." And he goes, "Yeah, I did remember. Mulligan didn't talk to me for a week." And he says, "All right, I'll pay you." And he did. He paid me $1 a year.
A year.
A year.
Oh my God.
And it was kind of his way of goofing around with people. But he says, I'll take care of you in the meantime." And he did. You know, everywhere he come up to me, not once or twice a week, "Dave, I'll take care of you. Take care of you." And then in December of 1980, I worked there for about 3 months. I was working on a project called Premiere. He come up to me and he says, "Congratulations, you're a Studio Tech 1." And I said, "Wow." And now I got insurance, and I got a nice pay raise on top of that. 6 months later, I was made Tech 2. And then a few years later, I was made Tech 3. And then I made quite a few years after that, I made technical director, and then supervisor, and I left as a production operations supervisor at ESPN. So, and that was my career, and I'm sticking to it. So.
And that's why it's radio talk, because we talk about radio.
And
And
television.
we throw a little television in every now and then. Everybody goes to the dark side from time to time. Yep.
Yeah.
We're finding more and more people that were in radio went into television these days because the radio jobs are disappearing.
Yes, they
And
are.
now, like the studio that we're in right now, there's so many more television stations, just like even access television stations, all kinds of stuff out there now. But the radio jobs are getting to be few and far between.
Yes, I know. I taught at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting for nearly 50 years. And I remember my first night at CSB as an instructor. And my knees were shaking. I was so nervous. And
So weren't the students.
yeah, but I got over that, and I saw a lot of changes there, and I loved it there. And Dick Robinson had a great guy, and I worked with Dick at DRC. He was sales manager there, and you worked with him, and of course you knew him from day one.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when you started at DRC as an account executive.
Yep.
You remember one of the questions I asked you?
Who does your hair?
No, I asked you. I says usually they give you a list where you start out
An account list, yeah.
Yeah,
You can see who your clients are.
Yeah, I said,
Yep,
so
yep.
you have an account list? Yeah. I says, mind if I see it? No. Hands me a blank piece of paper, and I went, nobody on here. He goes, yeah. He says, I got to create my own.
Yep. Yep.
And that
yep.
you did.
Yep.
You did a good job, and we worked doing spec spots together.
Northwind Hang Gliding was actually my first client.
Really?
A hang gliding place, and what I did was, as a young guy there, and really not having any accounts, I knew American Top 40. And American Top 40 on Sunday night didn't cost a lot of money to advertise because it's Sunday night. Who's going to buy Sunday night? But if you ever go out and you look at the traffic flow on 91 and 84 on Sunday night, lots of people coming home from a weekend away. So as a result, I put together a little package, and I put like 4 commercials in a 4-hour show. And I put an intro and an outro brought to you by, this case, Northwind Hang Gliding. And because it was 4 commercials, one every hour for 4 hours on a particular show, it got results. I mean, and it was hardly any money, and nobody else at the radio station had ever even sold it because it was Sunday night. Nobody cared.
Yeah.
But when you go out and you get excited about something and tell everybody they could be part of American Top 40, that's what got people excited.
That's American
Yeah.
Top 40.
That's how I started, was getting something like that. And took a long, long time. But the thing that I loved the most was we got to create commercials. I used to go in the morning, and I'd open up the newspaper, and I'd find an ad in there, and I'd check the list, and nobody was talking to that particular business. And I'd make some notes, I'd write some copy, and then I'd go see Dave, and we'd talk about what the idea was, and we put an idea together, and then we would go into the studio, and we would record the commercial for the ad that was in the paper that morning. And then once the commercial was done, I'd go to see this guy who had never seen me before in his life, and I'd walk in, and I'd say, geez, I'd like to talk to you about advertising on WDRC. And he goes, radio, I'd never do radio. And they said, really? You will when you hear this. And I hit that, and they go, oh, my God, it was the commercial. And that was what they call spec selling. Yeah. And it was the idea, and it wasn't, I had somebody actually say, who do I make the check out to? It wasn't about the radio station then. It was about the idea, it was about the concept. And that's because I had somebody like you. And years later, when I was on the sales side at another radio station, the sales manager came over to me and saw me writing copy. He goes, we got production guys that do that. I said, you take this away from me? I got nothing. This is the only way I can work.
You were always very creative.
Well, I didn't understand ratings and can't really get excited about, the only thing you can really get excited about is when you know your audience, you basically know the type of people that listen, and then you design your commercials to go after that group. And if you have only 100 listeners, and you can motivate more of those 100 listeners to actually come to the client than somebody who may have 100,000 listeners, but they don't know how to get that audience excited. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I remember the first spot. You came in with a client. What was it? It was a bedroom?
Water Bedroom.
Yeah.
Water Bedroom's got a new store. It's in Avon, Route 44. Yep.
So he comes in. He says, I got to have you sound like a drill instructor. And I says, okay. So through the art of the magic of radio and multi-tracking, I created a platoon of people. And we both, just between the two of us, yes, sir, no, sir. You know. So then I had the copy, and I had to read the copy, and now the roles were reversed. He was getting to produce me, which he loved every minute of it, because it's revenge time. And so I get in there, and it's like, I can't hear you. And we did those spots, and they aired.
Oh, yeah, no, the client was very happy, stayed with us for a long time.
Yeah, and then we did a couple of others, you and I did. You know, you actually had me involved in that.
Oh,
you
my
know.
God, I remember one we did for a women's boutique down in Rocky Hill, and it was called 3 Times a Lady.
Yes.
And it was a very, very little boutique, but very expensive, like one-of-a-kind gowns and everything. So I went back and I wrote a commercial, but instead of I made it sound like this was something you want to be. That's someone special. You don't want to see anyone else with a dress like this. I mean, you want to be 3 times a lady. And that's what the place was called. Well, the funny thing was, went in, he's the guy that when I walked in and played it for him, he goes, who do I make the check out to? He loved the commercial.
Didn't we put 3 Times a Lady in there? I thought we put the song 3 Times a
We
Lady
did.
to open it.
We did, yeah.
I thought, yeah.
And then what happened was he said people were calling him from Springfield saying, how do I find Rocky Hill, Connecticut? They couldn't wait to go there.
Wow.
But then again, that was the creative.
Yeah.
And you were a production guy that would let me, we lovingly call sales scum, you let me, you basically
Let you be you.
yeah, and you encouraged me, and so that made my job because I never cared about sales. People go, Parker. I said I got sales managers. I'll tell you, I wasn't really the sales guy, but I love the ideas and I love that. And so when you and I could do that, we could tell you stories of that.
Oh,
really
gosh.
could be a whole nother show.
Oh, then you actually worked on the air before you started at DRC. Where did you work?
95.7 Kiss FM in the middle of 60 minutes of nonstop hits.
And,
I got
and
to
that was
do
prime time, right?
Yeah, yeah. Prime time was what then? Midnight to 6 a.m.
AM, yeah.
Well, the funny thing was, it was a what they call a hot adult contemporary station. It was very up-tempo music, dance music, a lot of that, and so all night long, the music, and you were never supposed to stop the music, except once an hour. When I say 95.7 Kiss FM in the middle of 60 minutes of nonstop hits, then you start the music again. Well, it got to the point where, I was like low man on the totem pole, but I was on the air. But the funny thing was, they hired me there as a salesman, and nice account list, but the station had just changed from beautiful music to, top 40. And because of that change, all the clients I had, they pretty much dropped off the air because they didn't want to be on a station like that. So one day the general manager asked me how things were going, and I told him, I won't say the language here, but I just basically said, nah, I can't stand it. I said, as a matter of fact, you have an overnight position, and I want to do that. He goes, you want to go on the air? I said, yep.
That was a full-time position on.
No.
No, just part-time?
No, it was part-time. If the janitor couldn't get there and the guy that ran the garage door was absent.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the guy they called. But then my sales manager basically got upset when she heard me. I was only doing it like one night a week. And she went crazy. And she said, you have to decide if you're going to sell or you're going to go on the air. And I looked at her and said, I'm going on the air. And that was it. And I handed all the accounts, went to making about maybe a touch more than minimum wage, and loved every second of it. But then, I had to do a lot of other work to make ends meet. But, it's really, there's nothing that compares to radio. There really isn't. Still isn't.
Yeah, well, you and I had the pleasure and the privilege to be on the air with this guy again.
Oh, that was, yeah.
And that was at our competitor station,
Yep.
WPOP.
Yep.
You were a sales rep there.
Well, yeah, but what happened was the radio station was sold to another company, and they decided that they were going to run things differently. And we had, basically, in this market, we had a radio station that was called WPOP, which was News Talk. Then we had what was Magic 104 that became Star 104, and then it became Radio 104, which was like the hottest property in town. And when we did that, going right for kids and everything with alternative rock, one of the stations that the same company bought, that bought our company, bought WHCN. And now WHCN was not as popular as 104. So what they did was they took all of our accounts away and they were giving them to the seasoned sales staff at HCN. Now we've been selling with nothing like, we had like a tape recorder from how much people, an answering machine, they liked the station. Mm-hmm. And we had a fax machine, remember faxes?
Yeah.
All these people that wrote letters, how much they loved the station. And that's what we sold with. So then they took them all away. So then I quit. And they gave me a nice going away party. And they really, said, that's it. And the next day, the general manager calls me and he goes, we don't want you to leave. I said, I already left. They said, you had a going away party. That's it, I'm out. He says, well.
He knew your weakness.
well, no, the whole thing was, I told him why I left, which was, I said, never mind that you have a radio program running at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the host was G. Gordon Liddy, who was one of the former Watergate guys that broke in, and he's asking women to send in pictures of themselves in their lingerie holding rifles for his calendar. I said, never mind that program's on the air at 9 o'clock in the morning. I said, it's the fact that you give up on Hartford and you go to a nationally syndicated show at 9 o'clock in the morning. He goes, yeah? Well, then you do a show. And and I was like, I basically cut my own deal, got out of the sales department, but held on to key accounts that I could work with that would still spend enough money where I could pay myself. And kind of just went on the air. Called you because I didn't have a clue on how to operate any of the equipment when I went in there. I'm like, sure, I can do that. Monday morning, not a problem. Hi, Dave.
Called me, 3 times? First time he called me, he says, we had stepped back a little bit. We talked about this very briefly at the WDRC's 35th reunion. That was up in Windsor Locks. Now, I had my son with me, and we were talking, and my son he was not even 6, he was 15 at the time. And so my son David and I are driving home, and he says, you going to be doing a show with Steve Parker? I says, no. I said, Steve Parker will never get a show. I says, he'll forget about it. Other things will come up. It isn't going to happen. Shut my mouth. Yeah. 2 weeks later, I'm at ESPN. I get a phone call paging a phone call from me. So and it's him on the line. He says, I got the show. I'm going to do the show. I want you to help me out. I says, okay. And he says, good, whatever you can do. And I said, whatever you need, Steve, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you, buddy. Okay, well, hang up the phone. 20 minutes later, calls me again. I got to come up with the name of the title of the show. Which we're going to call it. We'll call it Midday Magazine.
Oh, yeah, that was the first idea. Yep,
yeah,
yep.
And the reason I call it Midday Magazine, because Dick McDonough had put together a Midday Magazine show at DRC, and then he called it Midday Magazine. So I said, well, nobody else is doing it now, so, take the name. So he goes, yeah, okay. Hangs up the phone again. 20 minutes later, he calls me up and he goes, no, he says, I'm gonna call it Steve Parker and something. I says, whatever you want to do. Yeah. He says, oh yeah, and one other thing. He says, I gotta have somebody with me. I says, no, you don't. You can handle the show all by yourself. You don't need anybody with you. He said, no. I definitely need somebody to play off of. Okay, whatever you want to do. It's your show. You do whatever. I says, who do you got in mind? There's a big pause. And he goes, you. I said, me? I said, I haven't been on the air in years. And he says, I want you on the air with me because we talked about what we did back in the production days at DRC. And plus he needed somebody to teach him how to run the board.
I had never a clue what I was doing in there.
Yeah, and so I said, okay, I'll teach you how to run the board, and then I'll be on my merry way. Well, that didn't last. He spent 2 weeks on the board by himself, and he picked up very quickly. He picked up really quickly. And so I taught him how to run the board, and then we switched seats. I was behind the board in the beginning, and then he was in the guest seat. So then we flip-flopped. So he ran the board, and I was in the guest seat. And the only other time I ran the board is when you were doing a remote, or you just dump it into my lap. Hey, I can't do the show tomorrow. I got to be in Florida to do the Bidding Barn commercials. And I go, so I've never hosted a show myself. So when we were talking, he says, He said, I just got to get somebody to screen the show. I said, what about David, my son? And he goes, okay. Yeah, I said, so took David in and we showed him how to run the screening area and took the calls and did a great job. He did such a great job. Judy Jarvis, who had her show after ours, hired Dave to screen her show. And and at the time he was 15.
And Dave actually got paid by Judy Jarvis.
Yes, I got paid. So I says, go for it. And David had a sense of humor, a very warped sense of humor. He'd be sitting there reading the paper, and Steve would be trying to talk to him and waving at him. And because there was a glass between us, he had no communications back and forth. And he's running around going crazy. And Steve says to me, he said, go tell your son I got to have this. And, So, all right, so I go in. I says, Dave, you listening to the show? And he goes, yeah. I says, I just like to see Steve overact a little bit, I says, listen to him. Well, he's driving him nuts. And then Dave would go into his, help him out, but that was the crazy stuff.
Oh yeah, no, we had a lot of fun doing that, and we always stayed connected through usually through Access TV.
Yeah.
And little things like that. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity. I was approached. Actually, Arnold Dean, who was a wonderful broadcaster, I was approached
Good
at
friend,
Arnold.
good man.
Yep, I was approached at his wake by the head of CBS for Hartford, who ran all the radio stations that they had: WTIC, AM, FM, WRCH, Light 100.5. And 93.7, back then, yeah, hot 93.7. So they had all these radio stations. And she walked up to me at Arnold Dean's wake and said, don't you think you should do something for us? And at that point, I had pretty much been out of radio. I was doing voice work for Channel 8 for like 17 years, doing what they call booth announcing, where you hear News Channel 8 weather brought to you by your...
We've got 2 minutes left.
Yep. Oh, well, sure. Now I'm talking, and there's 2 minutes left.
Talking the microphone.
Now that I'm talking, there's 2 minutes. This is what happens. We did the whole... okay. Now I got less than 2 minutes left. Anyways, that's how I ended up at TIC 1080. I got offered a job in the middle of a funeral home, in the middle of Arnold Dean's wake, and the rest is history. Boy, what was the question that started this whole thing? That's why it's radio talk.
Yeah,
Good thing
we
we
love
went back to radio.
Talking
Dan.
about radio, you don't know what happens. My first job in the business was WLIE, as I said. And
Don't start again. The show's ending.
Yeah.
Don't start the whole big. Don't go back. My first job in the business.
I just wanted to tell you.
Don't talk about my first job in the
no,
business
not
now.
your first job. But Bob Marks of WDRC worked there. It was his first job.
10,
Brian
9.
Thomas of WTIC fame and DRC fame worked there. So, and that's
I
it.
can't stop him. I'm trying my best. Good seeing you.
It's good to see
you
you.
for coming
Yes.
by.
See you on Radio Friends again. This is it. This is our show here today, and hopefully we'll have great guests coming up. We're going to hopefully have the guy who started CRN, Connecticut Radio Network. And,
Barry Berman, and we're talking about a couple of other very well-known personalities that you'll probably know. And then if you ever you feel like it and you're doing anything and you get on your computer and you go to YouTube and you look up another program that we do called Radio Friends Again, you'll love that. We do that every week with all kinds of fun people that you probably remember. All right?
Okay.
We good?
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here on Radio Talk. Roll it in.